Audit Tuesday is honored this week to be joined by John Young, CEO of Neutralize AI and noted authority on security and security incidents. John Young is an international known AI expert and has appeared on numerous TV shows and podcasts and is frequently speaking on hacks and cyber scams. Thank you very much for joining, John.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So first, John, why don't you give the audience a little bit more of your background?
Okay, people always love to hear this story. I like some of the experts that you've seen in security. People say that my life story sounds a lot like the movie Catch Me If You Can with Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks, because when I was a teenager from 1973 to 1977, 78, I was hacking into the AT&T phone system. And the FBI sent some agents to my grandmother's house in New York, and then they sent some agents canvassing the area in Laguna Hills where I live, knocking on doors, asking who was making calls to New York from the community pool. So that scared me straight when I found out that they said I had committed interstate theft of services as opposed to regular fraud, because interstate theft of services carries 10 years prison possible for each charge, and I had over 50 charges, they said. So I don't think I could do 500 years, and that scared me to the point where I went in the other direction and realized that since they were chasing me, there was a career to be had in preventing people from being criminals, and I wound up having a 40-year career in cybersecurity and IT operations. I was a network director at McDonnell Douglas on the $41 billion C-17 program all the way back in 1988. And then I retired from IBM's cloud division as a SME, subject matter expert, who is dealing with pure cybersecurity. I'd been a manager for years. I'd managed over 40 offices worldwide. They paid for me to travel around the world and set up networks and set up offices. I had 30 plus IT people that were reporting directly to me, but I got tired of management. So for the last 13, 14 years, I just went fully technical again. I just wanted to be 100% cybersecurity, and that's all I did for the last 13, 14 years, let's say.
I hear you spent time on the help desk. So many reports on the MGM hack talk about the hack starting at the help desk. What has been reported?
Well, I didn't start on the help desk. I managed the help desk. Help desk, I had like 7, 8 people who were taking calls. It was pretty much a white glove help desk at that time. Now it's all outsourced overseas, and they call the help desk a lot of time the employees did the hurt desk, because a lot of the tickets got closed through attrition. And that can sort of lead to the problem here, because people will open a ticket, and if the help desk doesn't respond right away, then that leads people to believe, that their ticket was forgotten. So if a scammer calls and just says, yeah, you opened a ticket a couple months ago, we're sorry, we were backlogged, and now we're finally closing out, and the person can't even remember if they opened a ticket. And then we can go into this a little further on how the scam actually works. But I can tell you right now why these calls are actually happening. And the reason is LinkedIn is a treasure trove of information. Okay, and with the MGM scam specifically, a lot of the information that I've received was across Okta and global administration. We'll talk about YouAttest and in identity management and attestation software. Least privileges. We have a pretty hardcore crowd here, so I can go into stuff like that. But basically, I did a search for Okta Global Admin, and I had hundreds of hits on LinkedIn with the company name, what the person did. And from there, that's all I would need to start making calls to people in that same company, saying, as in MGM, the multi-factor authentication was bypassed through social engineering. It was supposedly an inside situation where They called the help desk. The help desk allowed this person who had global admin rights to get in. And next thing you know, everything starts to shut down. It's a ransomware situation that cost MGM on the conservative side a few $100 million.
So help desk attacks are common. So in your experience, why are help desks so vulnerable?
It's really the concept of a help desk that's so vulnerable, because the people a lot of times that are getting attacked, it's not their day job to be in IT, right? So if they get a call from a help desk person or someone pretending to be a help desk person, they'll do things like give up remote control of their system, or they'll get an email from this person and they'll say on the phone, I'm sending you an email, just click on this link and just follow the instructions. And before they know it, they're downloading some malware to their machine and they have another ransomware situation. Like I said, you can get to the right person these days because of LinkedIn and the fact, and I'm not faulting anyone for it, because they just want to get out there what they do and what equipment they're using. They talk about the apps that they're an expert on. So they're giving the scammers a blueprint, basically. If you're a network engineer and you say, I'm a Cisco engineer, work on the architecture, and here's the equipment that I'm an expert on, suddenly you know, okay, here's the whole schemata, basically, for this network, for this company. And the same thing applies for, say, someone in finance. They could say, I'm working on Peachtree accounting, and if there's vulnerabilities there, then a scammer will know, okay, that's what I can attack. And that's really the bottom line. Is there's so much information out there. In the old days when I was on watching the help desk and hearing about a lot of it, and I would even get called myself, because you got to remember, when I started, it was the Wild West, right? And managers would just call me and say, hey, I need this ID right now. And I knew them personally, and I would create it on the spot with no documentation and no policy, no process, because there was no such thing going on 30 something, 40 years ago with scams like this. No one knew about it. But after a while, you got to realize any company, no matter how big, no matter how small, they have to have policies in place where it needs manager approval and written approval through some kind of change management, they could call it, or I call it change control process, like a library system that keeps track of all these tickets that are being opened. So that's good for forensics later on, because after you have had an incident, you got to kind of backtrack and find out how it all happened. And if you don't have anything but a phone call, how can you prove anything? You don't even have an email, you know? So those days are hopefully long over, but there's startups that actually are moving so quickly that they are giving people control, and they're actually giving them way more rights than they should have. And that's where the least privilege comes in, because in the case of the MGM hack, it was an attack at the top level. It was a global admin for their Azure, infrastructure. And that's my next point that I'd like everyone to realize. This, in my opinion, and you only get to learn what they tell you, because it's actually bad cybersecurity procedure to reveal too much to the world, because then they'll know how to do it again, right? So companies are really closed and close to the chest with what they reveal about stuff, and rightly so. But in this particular case, everything that I see points to it being an architectural flaw in their design, okay? And I'll tell you why. It all comes down to compartmentalization. With MGM, the dominoes started to fall where they couldn't check in guests. They had the elevator systems went out, that they had the private floors that you're not supposed to get to. They had supposedly slot machines were going down, and access to everything across their resorts was going down. Now, when I was at IBM, we were compartmentalized. We were the cloud division. I couldn't see what any other divisions were doing. I couldn't see really far into my division because everything was siloed, and that's the proper way to do it. So even if someone had global access, they shouldn't have been able to see across the whole MGM environment, because that's a pretty big enterprise, obviously. And the fact that they didn't have good compartmentalization of the network tells me that there was a bad flaw in the design. And sort of like Facebook too. Remember when Facebook went out for a few hours on, was it October 5th, 2021? They basically had pushed out a router change, according to them, that shut down all their data centers. They took out access to Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp. Employees couldn't use their badges to get anywhere. They couldn't access servers, so on and so forth, right? To my mind, that's too much of an architectural flaw. Everything should be more compartmentalized. So if you take a hit, you take a much smaller hit. Okay, I wouldn't say small hit when it's Facebook or MGM, because we're talking in Facebook, they said it was like $56 million that they lost in a few hours. With MGM, 10 days or so. And we're talking, even with cyber insurance, because there's a limit of supposedly 250 million, 300 million that they could possibly get paid out. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that were lost, besides the reputational hit. And a few days ago, I'd seen the first of the class action suits that were started by customers who were angry because their social security numbers were taken, and driver's licenses and personal information. And at this point, if they had social security numbers, they can create IDs, because that's the holy grail for scammers. And besides that, then they had all the 10,000, 20,000 MGM employees' personal information, which has, of course, their social security number, address, anything you can name. So basically, that was a hit that was bad on many, many, many levels. And customers could also be affected too, because their accounting systems, if they were accessed, and any financial institution that they're dealing with obviously is at risk, because now they can get into employees' emails, send out bogus vendor invoices that look exactly the same. They'll have all the bank routing information, change that a little, and the fallout from this is going to take a long time to really hit.
So also, the reports on the MGM hack say that attackers went after key identity resources like their identity and access management system. Is that what you read and heard?
Yeah, I've heard that too. And that goes back to the attestation, YouAttest. It's in the name, right? A lot of people, even in the industry, don't know what attestation means. Basically, they know what a AAA server is, authorization, authentication, and accounting. But attestation is actually, I think it should be like a fourth leg of that. So it'd be a quadruple A server. Basically, the authentication, some people feel, is a subset of one of those three. I disagree, because when you get to the concept of least privilege that we're talking about, least privilege means you should only give someone, an employee that's in the company, enough privileges to do their work and nothing more. And in this case, obviously, in MGM and Caesars and any company that has an across the board hit like that, they didn't follow the least privilege practice, because there was way too much damage that was done.
And attacks on the identity systems for enterprises, they're more common today, right?
Well, what's the more common? Just looking at websites, right? 30,000 websites plus successfully hacked a day. Now, that sounds like a lot, right? But the last time I looked, there was 2 billion domains out there with websites supposedly behind them. Now, if you had 30,000 websites successfully hacked a day, it would take you years and years and years, decades, to get to hitting the 2 billion mark. So there's plenty of area for them to cover. So the attacks on identity management have increased, no doubt about it. Everything's increased, tripled, quadrupled, because there's an old saying that necessity is the mother of invention, right? Well, my topper on that is necessity is the mother of invention, but desperation is the father of necessity. And what I mean by that is during the pandemic, people turned to crime because they were desperate, and they would never have thought of anything like this, trying to break in and do data breaches and such. But they were so desperate that they found ways to buy pre-made tools on the dark web, supposedly, that can do a lot of these things. And identity management is a weak point for a lot of companies, obviously, and don't even have identity management software. I mean, you say there's attacks on identity management. Well, if you don't have the software, is that considered an identity management attack, right? And is social engineering, where you already have their information and someone just gives you the access, that can't really be considered an attack, because there's no software in the world that will recognize that if someone's given legitimate access. Otherwise, all productivity would stop, right?
So it sounds like it's imperative for organizations to have an extra set of eyes on these identity resources to ensure they stay secure, not just the IAM people themselves, right?
Yeah, it all depends on budget. How much money do they have, right? How many layers do they have? A lot of companies that talk to me say, oh, we've got a great IT operations group, which is fine. But IT operations and cybersecurity are two different things, okay? Now, in my previous role, it was IT operations, but at IBM, I was leading a team that helped with the cybersecurity aspect for IT operations, with scanning and accounting and all of the things that go into the patching. There's an incredible amount of work that goes into doing all that. And then on top of that, I was being audited by a third entity that was a completely different division. And their whole job was once a month was to pick a bunch of devices at random and do a audit on me that was supposedly 300 plus data points on each device. So that's how granular it can get. You can have IT operations that are the best in the world, but unless you have the cybersecurity team that's helping them and auditing group that's monitoring and auditing the cybersecurity team that's helping the IT staff, then there's a missing piece there somewhere. And a lot of companies just don't have the budget or the bandwidth to be able to do that. So there's a huge market out there for third company partners to come in and actually do that, those last two pieces. And I think that's going to blow up like, nobody's business in the next few years.
So Gary, isn't this where YouAttest comes in, identity controls that attest to what the ED and IAMs are granting access to?
Exactly. And I just love the way John kicked us off. I mean, straight out. He goes, listen, and it's wonderful to listen to John, and y'all out there, listen to his other YouTubes and stuff. He goes in depth. He understands the mind of a hacker because, John, let's face it, you started that way, right?
Right.
You understand it's in, especially us in the control world. We tend to look at, I can get around on, being an Okta AD or whatever the controls. That's not the way hackers seeing it. Seeing it from the outside, and I loved what you said about LinkedIn, right? You can help this. Help this is just, trying to get to 5 o'clock, okay? Reading where you are. Wow, North Carolina, great, great. Job title, just match it up. You're going to get through. These guys are going to let through because that's not really their job. And once we understand that the help desk really isn't a security mechanism, then we can make the leap, and this might upset some people out there, but I also don't believe IAM tools are by themselves security mechanisms. They're functional mechanisms. They are. They're damn good functional mechanisms. They give SSO. They do the initial authentication, right? Where the extra set of eyes has to come in and has to be set up is in the governance. The governance of not only the groups and whatever, which is, what John said, straight up. You got a problem here. You got a problem with least privilege. Once again, functionality. The functionality of IAM and the help desk is to add. You need access to systems, rock and roll. You need access to Workday, rock and roll. That's the functionality, right? And the tools are designed for that. Where is the mechanism in the organizations to pull back, to review what we've given access to then minimize what access is to? And that's where I look at it and I go, it is not a functionality problem. It is, as John said, an attestation problem. What I read about the MGM hack is that the IAM, literally the agent on the AD, was redirected to another IDP. Okay? And that time the IDP was more than happy to let every other subsequent authentication get through. Why? Because that's who they were. Okay? Where is the attestation on the policies? It shouldn't just be on the groups. Shouldn't it be just least privilege? It should be attestation on the policies. And John knows this world more than me, and he's brought up something to this about the Facebook, right? Where was the attestation on the policy of that Cisco router? Where is the attestation on that? I simply do not fault the products, and I don't fault the people, because that's their job. They're doing their job. They make things work, whatever. It is the system. It is the whole plan that we put together to saying, great, we'll let Bob do the functionality, but on the important functionality, we will have Jane take a look, and she'll be triggered, and she's going to have to attest this. And this is not hypothetical. One of the accounts that Ashley manages, literally one of the security managers, took the policy and said, anytime anyone becomes an admin in this group, I will be alerted and I will attest to that. That's what needs to be put into our systems. It should be built into these products, and it should be built into the systems. That's why, and as John intelligently said, that's why I call this company YouAttest. Because it was okay, the functionalities are great out there. And I really do. I think the IAMs are the head of the snake. They're the best products out there today, leading the charge in IAM. But it's not their fault if people are changing the policies and changing the groups, and no one is attesting to those changes. That's where the missing piece is, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, you brought up a good point there, Garrett, too. Part of this, too, is the identity management is set too broadly, right? Which we saw it with MGM, right? Should be focused and dynamic setting of the rights and doing all that when people have access to an application. That is the big thing, okay, that's coming out. AI is huge, and I know you're incorporating that, you said, into your products that are coming out, and I think that's it's a really important point. Now, for anyone that's taking the CompTIA Security Plus test, okay, coming up in 701, they've changed some of the parameters and all of that. And I know from listening to Ian Neal, I don't know if any of the people here know who Ian Neal is, but he's an icon in our industry, and he spends 40 weeks plus a year teaching Security Plus, Network Plus, and all the other security courses. But anyway, they're adding now in the 701 about dynamic identity management. So if people are taking that test, first of all, get in while you can at 601, because 701 is going to be another level up, because they always make them harder as time goes on. But also identity management actually has a pretty important part there too. So I would say for anybody that's getting into it, my other personal feeling is, if you're a guy that's, or just person that's doing identity management, that to me is a job that is really vulnerable to being minimized or replaced by AI. Okay, if you're there creating 50 accounts, user accounts, I mean, that, to me, that was the most boring thing possible, was just creating user accounts, without having some kind of template or something where you can clone the accounts. But if that's all a person is doing, you're doing that day after day after day. So the fatigue factor for doing that leads to errors, right? That's why people are going to be looking
That's a good
towards
point. That's a
AI
really good point.
to
Yeah.
be. AI never gets tired, It's always going to do the same thing the same way, and then learn from any other things that may affect it as time goes on. So I would say if a person's a identity management and user account person, really think about how you can add value, because it won't go away completely, but because you say there needs to be someone to review that, right? When the alarms are going off, or they need to attest to something, that's the level that people should be at, is the attestation of it, not just creating them, because that's what every executive is looking for.
I think that's really good. The stuff is going to automate it. It gets in there. Okay. And the other week we had Malcolm Harkins on, who is, AI expert on a whole different side of it, on the worries and concerns. And he went into AI model poisoning and all this stuff. Okay. So if we're going to automate, which we are, right? Everything is getting automated, right? Where is the control? Where is the governance? Where is the attestation? Real good summary. Love it.
Well, every field changes, but our field hyperspeed compared to others, as far as this goes. And I remember when we didn't have an internet. Really, it was ARPANET, and we didn't have PCs, and I mean we didn't have voicemail. You had to pick up the phone. That made it easy to be a computer security guy. I first stumbled into a honeypot at McDonnell Douglas because this guy's process was out of control, and my job to kill processes that were taking up too much CPU time. So when I saw that process going crazy, I actually went and looked at his home drive to see what the executable was, at the bottom line of it, and a skull and crossbones came up in the most primitive manner, stars and X's, a black screen with, it was no graphics even in those days. And basically it started saying, I got you. And the guy came running into the data center looking for me. What were you doing looking at my process? And I said, well, it was out of control. I had to kill it because you were stopping everybody from running their jobs on the, system here. And he grumbled and walked away, but that was the first time I actually fell into that kind of situation. It was an only time, because I learned my lesson, about checking things out and stumbling into things that looked sort of like they're drawing you in. That we talked about on another discussion you and I had about how people get drawn into these kind of situations with honeypots, honey files, honey nets, blah, blah, blah. But every time someone makes a mistake or sees something that someone else had made a mistake on, that's a lesson to be learned. And it'll help in the future if they learn from their own mistakes. It wasn't a mistake on my part, but it taught me a pretty good lesson, that's for sure. And another thing I wanted to say too is, you mentioned about the alarms and people reviewing and stuff like that. If someone's a SOC analyst, right, there's no way they're ever going to review something that is legitimate. And someone being given access beyond what they should be given, if it's not attested to by someone and they're given too much rights, it's legitimate. It's just business as usual. So no SOC analyst in the world is going to even discover that. The best one won't discover that unless they personally know the user out of thousands of users possibly in their enterprise and say, Jane shouldn't be accessing this application because she's in another department completely. Why is she accessing the HR server when she's in accounting or something? That just doesn't happen because there's a snowstorm going on. You're not going to be able to pick out the individual snowflakes that are coming by. Maybe once I actually got lucky because I knew every single person, it seemed like, in my division, because everyone would always come to me on things. If you've been in a company for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, right? That's a different base than someone that just walks in, and they're overwhelmed. They don't, it takes a year, a big organization, just to get your feet wet. So that's why it's important to have great software behind you that can do a lot of these functions while the people get their experience and get up to speed.
Perfect. So, John, how can people reach you and find your writings?
Well, they can follow me on LinkedIn for sure. I've got 22 articles that I wrote on LinkedIn. I don't have a book right next to me, but I wrote an 800-page, roughly, cybersecurity book that goes into how to thrive in cybersecurity, basically. It's not a technical book. It's more like, what do you do when you're in this field, when certain situations come up? Because I was a data center manager. I was a software development manager for a couple of years. Managed, like I said, the whole infrastructure, and all of that came into my experience, and that's why I feel pretty comfortable talking about almost any subject, from that to service level agreements. A company can lose millions of dollars just for the fact that they're signing the wrong contract and they don't get the right level of service, and that's the same thing with identity management software. If they buy the wrong stuff, they'll be very comfortable using it, but it won't be helping them a lot. And my teams, if they had software that they didn't understand or they didn't feel was giving them bang for the buck, they would kind of just push it to the side and not really use it to its full potential. It could be the best software in the world, but unless it's laid out in a manner that makes it user friendly, even for high level IT people, because we're moving a mile a minute, and you need to have something that you can rely on. And if they don't have something they can rely on, then, the whole audience would probably say, time to move on. There's other, let it do its thing. I'll trust that it's doing its thing, or not even use it, period. There's tons of managers who are out tell you we have all these tools, but every one of them, has a different level of quality. And some are just sitting on the shelf and they don't get installed and we paid for them, or they're installed and they're not configured, or they're installed and they're not being really used to their full potential. And I'm sure a lot of people in the audience listening right now will agree with that.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I'm going to take one question before we wrap up that came from the audience here. What is the summary on the MGM and the strategy? I believe, I'll let John go on top of this. I believe the biggest thing when I was reading, when I came out of it, and John is closer to this than me, and says good things about, hey, we only know what we know, right? But every time I see these, I always see that there was changes in either privileges or in policies, and they go undetected and unattested by people who would know better. Right. And I like what John said, because he's lived it. You can't expect the South guy, right? Because he's fighting the battle. He's the one rowing the boat across. He does, whatever. Where is the guys and the process? Most importantly, the process of who have you determined before the crisis? Any changes at this level can cause catastrophic. This stuff needs to be looked at. Okay. And I can go product. I got a list. One of my lists is identified 150 products, which I believe need attestation built in, because the hackers, they're smart enough. They all come from our background. They know IT. They know that if I can redirect my authentication, like they did at MGM, if I can redirect my authentication, I win, because I'm the authentication source. So policies and changes of that nature. So let me be succinct. Any changes that take people up to admin privileges got to be attested by another set of eyes. That's just a given. That's principle of least privilege. Our friends at Joint Ransomware Task Force say that should be our number one thing that we take on. And second of all, key policy changes in our security apparatuses. And the way to remember that, the functionality. The functionality has to be governed. And to look at the operators and the operators and the pieces to be the governance tool, I think is silly. And if that means that more people need to go to professionals with managed services, I think John and I could have a whole nother webinar on that. Because I that's a personal belief of mine. Take it away, John.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Um, Another thing I wanted to kind of talk about real quick is voice verification, because you had said I started out as a hacker and all of that. Well, the criminal mindset and understanding it never really leaves. I was Joe Straight. I was so afraid of doing anything wrong. I don't want the FBI, taking me down. And I actually had to go through 3 secret type clearance reviews where they actually sent people to my old neighborhood in New York where I grew up and were asking questions about me. And I was always like really sweating. But once you learn how to scam, everything seems like it could be scammed, right? The guy that taught me how to scam, I went straight, but he went into the largest fraud in American history, $3 billion or so. That was a recertification of oil fraud that the leader did 4 years in prison and got all his assets stripped. And he had owned like Xanadu Hotel and an island in the Caribbean. We're talking major things. But recently I used AI voice cloning to do a lot of things. And one of the things I did was I used it to basically break into my own bank system, online banking system, where they said, my voice is my password. Please use this to verify me. Well, I took a recording that I'd done on YouTube and I ran it through an AI script that I wrote, and it actually let me in. And I have a video on that shows me doing that. And I stripped out as much information as possible because I don't want, that to be a worldwide thing. And it doesn't work every time. I had to hold the speaker at a certain distance. I held up a speaker and I had 3 phones. It took me 3 phones to do that. I had one phone recording it. I had another phone calling the bank, and I had a 3rd phone running the AI script. So basically I had, the bare minimum, and it was free software too. So that's how scary we are at.
I like how you wrapped it up. It's free software. So, if you got the Russians saying they're going to pay $20 million for any Android iOS hack, right? And you have the tools that are actually free, all it means is that someone needs to be incentivized to put his time into it. Yes.
Yeah. And people say AI is robotic. That's true, but that's in the hands of someone that really doesn't know what they're doing. Or doesn't take the time to do it right. Or like with me, I actually spend a little more money for a subscription. It's not much, $20 a month, about $250 a year. That's nothing, so you can literally start a business if you're a scammer with a computer and, $250 if you got it or less, free, to be able to do it. And if you're in a foreign country, okay, and you want to pull off a help desk scam like this, I actually have videos where I show a human scammer from a foreign country gets shut down by the employee in less than 30 seconds. They're saying, nice try, buddy, and hangs up. The same employee actually gets defeated by an AI bot where a guy from Nigeria is the hacker scammer. He contacts the same employee, but he uses AI voice cloning to sound like a woman from America with a slight Southern accent. So to the employee, it's a hassle, but he's not fooled. He puts up a couple of objections, but they're easily gotten past. And at the end, he's begging the AI bot to take control of his computer, and he becomes an unwitting victim of a help desk scam ransomware situation. And
so, John,
it's just so easy to do.
2FA is not the end all, that we might have to go beyond 2FA to authorization controls? Sorry,
Might.
actually created a product that 2FA did at 10 years, and that's why I've moved on now to principle of least privilege and authorization. Because yes, it is. We've gone past where the hackers can flip through our authentication, and we better be able to identify them once they're in.
Yeah, well, this is a tangent, but one of the big things that's happening now is people are recording others that are putting in their Apple passcode for their phone in public, or using their Apple ID, and then they're running by and grabbing the phone getting around the block and changing the passwords, locking them out of their own system. And I've seen this numerous times where people can't access their phones because it's gone, and Apple won't be able to help them because they don't have a legitimate, complaint at that point, because the other person has all the information. So once you have someone's phones, who cares about two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication? You just keep sending it to the phone you already have in your hand, and you say, yeah, that's me. And if someone actually uses like cached passwords in their browser, or they have their apps going directly into their application without a password, then that's like giving them the keys to the kingdom. If you have your bank account and you've said yes, for convenience, you'll do your online banking, but you don't want to enter the password all the time, it's in your browser, then they're in. And then if you use the same password for multiple ones and you have them in the comments or the notes, all they have your phone, they can get every password that you put in your notes, right? Suddenly they're into every single thing that a person has. And that's a rainbow, a spectrum of what the attacks. People can't even believe the free trials they started, or whatever that they have going on. And to me, Amazon, okay, if they get in your Amazon, Amazon will make that right. But if they get in your online banking, boy, that's a fight, because they legitimately used all of your accounts and they had your passwords and they flew right in there, and suddenly your account is drained. And I'm seeing more and more of that. And that's a little bit of a tangent, but banks need to do better if you're looking into the future, because there's also a chip, a SIM basically scam, where someone will social engineer a representative of one of the providers and convince them that their phone was stolen, or they dropped it or whatever, and they need a new SIM card, and they'll get it shipped to them. And then the next thing you know, they've got the legitimate SIM, and the person who's got the real phone, suddenly their phone doesn't work, and all the two-factor authentication is going to the new phone. So there's scams on top of scams on top of scams. If you use a cell phone clone software, now you're looking at being the person's identity that you call somewhere, it comes up as you, and then you use AI with that same voice. I mean, how can you beat it? You had the same phone number, the bank sees that, then you use the AI, the bank lets you in. Like I said, it's a little trickier to do that, but I don't want to give away all my secrets, on what to do. But basically, this is only the tip of the iceberg, and NIST is approved 4 new encryption schemes, I guess, or not schemes, blueprints on where they're going that will resist quantum computer cracking, because the encryption we have now is good up to a certain point, but when you get a quantum computer that can solve a problem in 7 minutes that takes a supercomputer 150 years to solve, as Google has said theirs can, the encryption we have is modern day, and it's going to be broken compared to something that is coming up with these 4 that NIST is approved moving forward with.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you, John. So I just want to wrap it up real quick. So us at YouAttest, we can be reached at youattest.com, or just write us at info@youattest.com. Thank you so much for being here, John. We really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And Garrett, you had said how people can reach me. Like I said, they can reach me on LinkedIn. My YouTube, I really don't allow people to see the videos unless I send them a link. For the most part, they can see a few of them. Most of them are hidden. But I've been doing a lot of TV appearances, so they can see those if they follow me. I did CBS News yesterday. I'm doing Fox next week, talking about holiday shopping, how to be safe online, and also grandparent scams there. So every time I get called, it's about something different. It's about MGM, it's about online safe shopping, it's about grandparent scams, it's about school attacks. I mean, this is the best industry to get into because the field is so wide. I could hold my arms out all the way, people couldn't see it. and people can specialize and get in one niche and make that their home, and have a long, very successful and lucrative career in cybersecurity.
We're focused on attestation, and when you took it to the end there, I was like, "Yeah, that's what you could do in this career." So great stuff. Perfect. Thanks, Ashley. Great job, and John, you're amazing. I just have to remind myself to talk because I wind up just listening. Great to hear you. All good. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
My pleasure.